This video is about a revision of a blog post I made 2.44 years ago, which roughly amounts to 2 years, 5 months, 8 days, 29 month, 8 days, 127 weeks or 1 day. And I'm getting these statistics from Alpha. I was trying to come up with an interesting number that would somehow amount to 7 or would be divisible by 7, but no luck on that. Anyway, so to get to the point, the title of this blog post is The 7 Stages of Space Exploration and Colonization. That was version 1.1 of the blog post that I made. And I've been kind of, I'm doing the, I think the logic represented in that blog post for a version 1.1 is not a bad start, and if I should say so myself, for somebody who doesn't have a background in applied or theoretical science, or science fiction at that. I mean, even science fiction good science fiction requires a foundation in physics or science in general. Eventually all the sciences do map back to physics, even biological systems, I believe. And what I'm trying to get to is that for somebody who doesn't have a background in science, I think it wasn't a bad start, if I should say so myself. So I do want to begin with that note, indicating that the logic represented in that blog post is a little static, and so goes the logic for the timelines that were mentioned in that blog post. That being said, each one of the 7 stages that have been documented in that blog post are very probabilistic at some time spectrum. And I don't mean that as an indefinite time spectrum in an unlimited set of universes or multiverses. I mean that in a very near term, in a very mid to long, like in a let's be specific, in a earthly sense, between a 10 to 100 year time span. And that's why I'm revising some of these constructs or logic structures, or even thought experiments, because I don't see some developments being very far out in terms of a couple hundred years. I also do not anticipate that the activities need to happen in a very sequential manner. So that being said, I'm going to get right to the actual blog post. I haven't actually sat down at this table, and I think the last blog post I did sitting down at this table was about the healthcare process, the triaging for the healthcare process. So it's been a while, but we'll just go with this. So I begin with saying, and I'll put a link to the blog post in this video in case anyone is interested. But I begin with the note saying that the current developments and when it relates to the opening up of the frontier is a realization that's going to occur in stages, and I make a point about biological evolution, but since the making of this blog post, again in 2015, I think this was after the making of this blog post, I could be wrong, but I've also come across concepts like the transcension hypotheses. I'm going to open that tab in the background just so I can remember to plug a link to that blog post, or sorry, to the Wikipedia page in the actual actually that's interesting. The transcension hypotheses redirects to the Fermi paradox. It's very interesting. That throws a bit of a interesting twist. I think I knew that this was redirecting to the Fermi paradox, but I'm not going to go into solution mode. I think there is a way to represent minds using all optical circuits. I think that this is a very, very uneducated guess. So I think it is possible that minds will just be represented through, again, all optical circuits as opposed to circuits that require some kind of a physical phenomena powering computation. However, even if it's an all optical circuit, the question is, what will that construct be encased in? Would it be some kind of a plasma, and like how will it traverse the vast distances, and how will it eventually dematerialize into a form that it wants to? I have some thoughts around that, but that's a little far-fetched. But this is an interesting segue because the transcension hypotheses, which the way I understand it, right now it redirects to the Fermi paradox, but I think I could be wrong, but it eventually boils down to inhabiting denser spaces. Because the way I understood it when I read this was that you could compute more efficiently in more denser, so you can come up with like transistors and well, in this case I guess it's going to be on a nanoscale or perhaps beyond, because theoretically speaking there's going to be a series of developments. So right now it's micrometer, then it's going to be nanometer, which I think is 20 years out, and then there's going to be a series of development in the nano world, which is going to lead to developments further down. So it's going to be perhaps other scales like attoscale, but when you do that, you can compute that much more efficiently, and when you can compute that much more efficiently, you're going to be able to power entire realities in that domain. So it seems a little far-fetched, but nanoscale, it seems like it's 20-25 years out in a functional sense. So I guess I wonder what series of developments will be required in order to be able to make to continue this process of miniaturization, which the way I understand it in a functional sense goes back to the development of watchmaking, after that precision instruments, then the microchip in this or previous century, and now we're going into different forms of computation with, again, a couple of different things powering this constructs, one of them being miniaturization as a development. So this is again a side topic or a subtopic, if you may. Just making sure the video is still recording. So yeah, the transcension hypothesis is something that came to my attention. It's a very interesting hypotheses. That's what it's really called. And yeah, so I want to mention that as well. So coming back to the blog post, I mentioned in the blog post that stage one is when we're currently in stage one, and stage one you can look at it in a bunch of different ways, but effectively we are like the human machine civilization right now sits on scale 0 on the Kardashev scale. I'm going to open that tab on the side as well. Yeah, so I'm reading the Wikipedia right now, a Wikipedia page entry right now, and we aren't exactly a type 1 civilization. We do not have the means to be able to store all the energy which reaches the surface from the parent star. So consider the fact that we're still burning fossil fuel, and generally speaking, and there's some other means of harvesting energy in terms of nuclear, geothermal, and what's the one? with the hydropower. So we're in exactly the we aren't exactly a Type 1 civilization. So we're somewhere in between Type 1 and Type 0, or Type 0 and Type 1. And what is happening though is the development of the platform, which will lead us to what I categorize as stage 1. We are again in stage 1. It begins with the development of the platform, and there's a couple of different factors when it pertains to making sure that stage 1 continues to evolve. And there's a couple of different phenomena again driving these factors. So I think the way I characterize or document stage 1 is the better word, have again direct correlations with the Kardashev scale. And the factors I think that are driving these phenomena are, in random order, energy abundance. So we're heading towards a world of energy abundance. It's becoming more and more possible with every passing month. It used to be years, but now it's every month. The price of solar and renewables are falling almost exponentially, and the trends indicate that right now in some markets, like large markets like India and China, solar is at a parity with coal. Not all fossil fuels, is at a parity at coal, so it makes no sense to do coal plants anymore. So countries like China are shutting down their coal plants, hundreds of them, and this is sunk cost in a project management sense. And the switches towards renewables instead of coal. So that's happening as this trend continues, as renewables continue to become more and more not just economical but eco-friendly, and as well more efficient, then it will make that much more of an economic and ecological sense, more so ecological, I guess, in my opinion, because we're going to run a fossil fuel anyway. So more sense to switch and make this switch as seamless as possible. So anyway, so that's one trend, the switch towards renewables, that is driving stage 1. Switch to renewables also allows the capability to be able to power newer ways of propelling different transportation systems, and making the segue into what I was going to say next. So far, the since Werner von Braun, if you want to go back, I think Werner von Braun was one of the pioneers in the world of rocketry. There could be others. I don't know of many. I know that a lot of the early developments when it comes to vertical rocketry comes from like initial pioneering work was done in the former Soviet Union, now known as Russia. So there's a lot of amazing technological development that's come from that part of the world. So I think there's a documentary on either on YouTube or Netflix that chronicles the contribution of Soviet scientists in the domain of astrophysics and rocketry in particular. I guess this would be more in the domains of propulsion system or rocketry versus astrophysics. But a lot of the initial pioneering work happened there, and it kind of like it contributed towards Soviet or at that era Soviet accomplishments, enormous accomplishments in this domain. From I believe sending the first living being in orbit to, I think, first person in orbit was also from a Soviet origin, Yuri Gagarin, I believe. I could be wrong. To like many other accomplishments, like sending probes to Venus, to a lot of other habitats like Soviet. There's been a lot of pioneering work done in that regard. But so coming back to what I was referring to, though, so then there was before that there was a lot of good work done. Well, good. So hold on, let me think what appropriate words. There was well, it was good work. It's intelligent work. But unfortunately, it's for Nazi Germany. So Werner von Braun was working for Nazi Germany. Uh, and when the war ended, he came to the United States. I don't know if it was part of Operation Paperclip or I could it could be Operation Paperclip, but I maybe it's another program. But Wikipedia cites, at least Google cites Wikipedia saying 1600 approximately German scientists came to the United States under this program after the war ended, and it makes rational sense to be able to do that in a humanistic sense as well, because I mean these are men and women who have spent their lives doing pioneering work, and it only makes sense to leverage their skill sets in order to be able to further scientific discovery and advancement. So anyway, so because the topic is rocketry, so Werner von Braun came to the United States, and the little I know about him, he had the autonomy to be able to run his labs and his work the way he wanted, and a lot of good work came out of that. And some of the ideas these individuals have were very groundbreaking or very future oriented. They were thinking of colonies, and they were thinking of settlements, and there were plans in place to move this forward, and a lot of good work was made in these realms. Then you kind of transition towards the late 50s into the 60s with the Apollo project. So there's a lot of good work. I think there were how many? I think there were 13 Apollo projects in total. How many Apollo projects or missions were there? 17. Oh wow. Okay. I don't think all of them were successful, so maybe like I don't know what percentage of Apollo missions achieved their target. Okay, so there are manned and unmanned ones. It depends on how you want to look at it. But anyway, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so 12 manned Apollo missions. And then a couple of unmanned ones, I'm assuming. Anyway, so this is just a historical background in terms of rocketry, and I guess the point I'm trying to get to is that there's stuff before that as well, because what's the name of the gentleman? NASA's field is named after him. NASA Field, California. Moffett. Moffett. What's Moffat's full name? Moffett. Rocket. Sorry, I just gotta look this up. I should do research before making the video. Okay, so I could be mixing the reference of the Moffett Air Base with somebody else, but I know there was an early pioneer when it comes to the field of rocketry, and I think the person was their origin was the United States, but this I forget this individual's name, but he was one conducting some of the early pioneering work, at least in the United States, whereby he was just using what today by today's standard be categorized as hobby rockets, but he was one of the first people to be able to try that on a smaller scale. Like they were making relatively large rockets and beaming them off using from the back of automobiles at that time. So forget the name of this individual. I think I saw this documentary on Netflix again or YouTube. I can't remember. I should save these references. So there is a build up to the developments that individuals like Werner von Braun and others, even the Soviet scientists, kind of capitalize upon. And the preliminary work was happening for quite some time, and it just kind of it kind of grew organically and kind of started mushrooming, for lack of a better word. Well, actually, that's not a good term because you could have an allegory. Just think about this, but like I'm thinking of the mushroom kind of cloudy thing. I gotta redo this video. I don't want to redo this video though. It's already spoken about a lot of good things. Yeah, I don't want to make a reference to that. I am tired. A little. But anyway, so what I'm trying to get to is I'm going to edit this piece out. It's a note to self to edit around the 20-minute mark. Let me make a note of that. All right, so there is a history of developments that lead to certain outcomes. Where I was going with the trends is that you have liquid rocket propulsion right now. And as amazing as the discoveries and the achievements and the breakthroughs have been, liquid rocket propulsion is only going to take you to the orbit. Maybe it will take you to Mars. And if you push it with some other technologies, like use the orbital assists intelligently, maybe it's going to take you to Europa and maybe it's going to bring you back. And if you really push it, maybe it'll take you to Neptune. But like, I don't know. Maybe that's a big maybe. But I think you're really testing the limits of these propulsion systems, and there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to fault tolerance and like length of duration for some of these trips. And I think, and going back to the energy abundance, as this trend continues, whereby the price for renewable continues to fall. And so what needs to be done is to power, here's the idea, is to power constructs in a distributed fashion whereby all the developments that need to happen are happening. And I'm really proposing not anything radical. However, some tweaks to how maybe perhaps this is all just a thought experiment. Like, I'm proposing basic research, but I'm also proposing that you do all the basic research that we do today and more. There's going to be a mix and match of different sciences, and new things are going to come about. There's many examples, but what I'm proposing is that because like there's so much to go out there and explore. What we do is we create new engines of wealth generation because energy is becoming abundant there, and we kind of structure this such a way that we do it in an eco-friendly way and we preserve the nature, because evolution, in my opinion, is something that's been going on for quite some time. Depends on how far back you want to go. It's been happening for a couple of billion years, and there's all these things that we're finding about life, and we're going to continue doing that because it took a while to build. I think, I'm not sure. Maybe there's some deep learning algorithm that has figured all of it out and can recreate it using very little materials while ensuring genetic diversity and not just cloning everything and continue to do so. But where I'm going is that there's got to be a way to push certain developments so that near-term breakthroughs can be achieved that would ensure that new propulsion systems become a reality on a midterm basis. Now, going back to the sub conversation, and I think Elon Musk has made some comments along these lines. I don't know anything much about. I don't know anything about propulsion systems, so there's a PDF sitting on my computer somewhere, but I haven't had a chance to go through it. But what I'm getting to is that whatever's going to come after liquid propulsion will evolve in a diverse set of ways, and like the logical, like there's a bunch of different ways that this could come about. This is all based on the assumption that we are inhabiting this flesh and blood body, this bag of blood and like cells supported by bone structure, and we will still inhabit this cognition, and you can say sentience, awareness. There's a bunch of different words, consciousness, but I'll just use the word cognition. There's a mind, and there's a brain, and there's the body, and this all. So this is all based on the assumption that we're talking about transporting the same to the outer world, and but there's another way whereby if you can ensure psychological continuity, which is something I've made a couple of videos about, very rudimentary, almost immature, because it's a very uneducated series of guesses or thoughts. But if you could somehow ensure psychological continuity, then that is more of an ethical question. Like, in my opinion, a copy of my mind is, I don't know if it's me or if it's another being, and I got to wrangle with those set of thoughts more. But we're like, coming back to what I was saying, like this argument is based on the assumption that we're still talking about this physical, biophysical presence with the mind as a engine, for lack of a better word, for ensuring that this version of intelligence or life or whatever you want to call it, conscious experience, I don't know if it really is conscious or not, but it continues. There's all these assumptions, and I just want to make that clear, because there in the future there could be other ways of modeling the mind, and we may choose to live in this reality or other realities like virtual reality, and it may start getting more interesting. I don't know, depending on further breakthroughs in science. But anyway, so coming back to this conversation, if we are still talking about flesh and blood bodies, then at least the outer space, because there are inner spaces as well, and like I said, the transcension hypothesis is I think it's a very logical argument, and it looks like it's redirecting to the Fermi paradox. So I don't know what all of this means, but propulsion systems. So the next evolution would probably look something like sounds silly to say, but a non-liquid propulsion. So it could be laser-powered beaming. It could be something else. I don't know what kind of studies are being done in order to be able to further understand relativity and bridging that with other constructs. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm also not going to talk about gravity, because I don't understand relativity, and I can I can kind of wrap my mind around how mass causes a curvature in space-time. That's an image I drew of a alien species, by the way. This was in December last year. It's not 2.5 years ago. It's more recent. Oh, there's a picture in the back too, which I didn't realize. Yeah, it's just something I do alongside. I was gonna make a story about this gentleman, alien gentleman, extraterrestrial. Where I'm going with this is, there will be breakthroughs. There will be other propulsion systems. Eventually, it's going to be non-liquid propellant. However, it's going to come about, I don't know. With nanotechnology being 20 to 25 years away, there will most probably be a space elevator. And all of these realities posit that the price to continue to send a pound of weight to space, or at least to orbit, plummets. And it plummets quite a bit. And eventually it's going to come down to free. And it will be free to send a pound of weight to space, or 10,000 pounds at that. It will be free because the infrastructure would have been built and would have paid for itself. And energy harvesting will come to a point whereby you can extract enough solar energy in a very short amount of time. And the solar panels would have paid for itself. So you would be able to harness enough energy to be able to send that 10,000 pound in 1 hour or a day or some very short amount of time. That cycle is going to continue, and it's up to the imagination to conceive how that growth will mushroom in orbit, inner orbit, outer orbit, different orbits, and other habitats, whether it's man-made colonies or off-world settlements, like Elon Musk's initiative with Mars, and my personal vision of terraforming Venus. There will be settlements on asteroids, and like I mentioned, I think equally important is to create these off-world colonies, which I think is the most ethical thing to do, considering the hypotheses that there could still be primitive life in some of the exoplanets that we will inhabit on some time scale. I don't know what the time scale would be. And this is a good transition going back to basic research. The reason I say there's a lot of this talk about jobs and automation displacing the workforce, but this is a great opportunity to tweak the systems so that a lot more people are doing science. And it requires cooperation in the earthly construct and more trust. That's to me, that's, I don't know, like maybe somebody else is going to reframe that problem and make it at least not just seem very simple, but come up with some very quantitative measure on how that could be done. Maybe it's going to be something on the blockchain over a period of time. I don't know. But it goes back to some of our kind of tendencies, like ego and like taming our drives, and I think it has more to do with that. But that's not the conversation I'm trying to get to. But the thing I'm trying to figure out is how can trust be enabled so that more scientific discovery can be powered. And what I mean by the next series of like the evolutionary steps towards the 7 stages that I categorize. It's not my ego talking, by the way. It's not that I categorize these 7 stages. It's just how I see the functional development of space, outer space happening in our lifetimes. And it's such an enormous universe out there. And the question that I pose is, why not? So if and when we tweak the systems so that we're getting more output in different realms, then we will do a broad range of activities in a lot of different areas, which will enable the kind of reality that which will really power the vision that has been with us for a while. So you can go back to Sir Arthur. Well, I haven't read a lot of Arthur Clarke or Larry Niven, so I'm not gonna say much about these visions, and I'm not gonna pick and choose exactly what happened in these worlds, whether like there's some themes they were exploring is going to exactly pan out this way. I'm being selective. I'm picking and choosing like Larry Niven's ring world and thinking, how could that be done on a 100-year time spectrum? Or I haven't read that book, by the way. Or I think Ian Banks is of the opinion that we should just be inhabiting man-made synthetic colonies with, there's a couple other things happening there with like AIs and like it's that like most of the actions are determined by the AI. So those are interesting questions, but like I'm not saying that's exactly how it should be done, but I think there is something there with respect to like the ethical decisions that one should be making, also in a Carl Sagan sense, who is of the opinion that the evolution of simpler life form on some of these habitats is an important factor, and we've got to ensure the hygiene of these environments, because if you go back a couple of billion years ago, we were these microbial beings. So these are all very important ethical conversations, and I'm also rethinking a lot of these things because I don't want the word it depends on the interpretation, but I'm not suggesting that if we find life on some of these planets or habitats, that we just expand by any means necessary. I think that's a very unethical and dangerous thought. And in no way, shape, or form did I ever suggest that. And I just want to be very clear about that. So by tweaking, coming back to the subject, by tweaking the systems, proper transitions can be ensured, however you want to look at it. And the previous videos of looking at certain realities in order to be able to boost true or real innovation is something that needs to be retaught. I don't I think Steve Blank made a video about this. There's a presentation of him talking about the main drivers that have historically contributed to growth, and he kind of cites two factors, but I think there are other alternatives. I can think of at least one or two more, and I'll just share them. That by just simply changing the way that some of our systems work and enabling more trust in the earthly construct, we can get better output, and this then becomes a positive sum game via which everyone benefits. How that's going to happen, I don't exactly know. Whether it means to create more communications links, whether it means more exchange of exchange studies, or whether all of that means we work on the transportation systems of the future, whether it means more automation in governance, whether it means that powering better foreign policy. There's a lot of these things that this one thing forces you to go in, and I think maybe all of these needs to be done and more. Because that trust is what really powers better and humanistic realities. And if you don't have trust, then it can become in some respects, like the the alternative can be nightmares, and you're just kind of stuck with those nightmares, and they keep evolving. Um, Whether it's extreme ideologies mixing with militancy or terrorism or what else? It's just like that's the alternative, and I'm not at all using scaremongering as a tactic. That is not my intention at all. I don't even know why I'm bringing that up, but I'm just trying to suggest that by altering the systems and making them radically transparent, that there may be a way to towards getting to better, like harnessing the creativity of the youth and their ideas, and giving the youth the platform for powering their dreams. And it is interesting that I find myself saying that. I'm 39 now, so and more I'm thinking about the world that my daughter's going to live in, and perhaps that's where I'm coming from. But I'm also coming from a reality whereby I would want to live indefinitely, and the ideas are in the mind of the people. They are not in your mind or just my mind. So that's the long segue, I guess. But that would be one way of, and here's where I was going with the tweak, for lack of a better word, in relating to the systems. And I say this as in a Fred Terman sense, and the work, that incredible work that Fred Terman did. Individuals can change and can bring about massive global positive change. And I cannot think of many people in this realm other than the scientists who have led. Actually, I'm going to take that one sentence back. There's many kinds of different breakthroughs, powering human rights and scientific breakthrough and enablement of networks that lead to the betterment of human life and reduction in suffering and improving human life and the quality of human life, more fun, more health, more vitality, more hope. And that's the work that Fred Terman did by enabling Silicon Valley. And now this trend is going global. And what I'm getting at when I say tweaks, maybe it's not a good word to use, but is really the enablement of these systems. And where I'm going, so I was going back to propulsion systems. Now, liquid propellant to something else like laser powered beaming. Eventually, like maybe there will be breakthroughs in microgravity, and so we're going to be able to just like levitate stuff in the air. I don't know when that's going to be possible. Like I don't know much about how, again, gravity functions, so I made that graph, or like to try to show how mass warps space-time. But like I don't know how far away something like that would be in terms of levitation systems and whatnot. But some of the other stuff that I mentioned, like the the vertical space elevators, I can see them. I can totally see that happening on a 25-30 year spectrum. How it's going to be supported is another thing, but and what kind of payload is going to be sending to space is also an interesting question. But it would be radically a lot more compared to what we can do with propulsion systems today, liquid or non-liquid. There's something else which is called John Hunter's space gun, and I've blogged about this a little bit as well, and it's a very interesting invention. And it's basically a giant cannon. It's called a gun, but it's basically a giant barrel, and you can put it up inside of like a body of water, or I think you can just hoist it on land-based surface as well. And I think it's powered by hydrogen explosions of sorts, and you basically just shoot this up and it goes straight in orbit. And this is a remarkable device which we haven't. I don't know if one has been built and tested whereby its efficacy towards delivering the payload into orbit has been tested, but I think some preliminary work has been done on the ground. again, the trust is important because you don't want these technologies to be abused and turned into weapons, or weapons of like causing death and destruction. So these are all these conversations that humans need to have, because the technologies are there. It's just that we need to think about harnessing these technologies effectively so that it ensures our continuity as species, and helps ensure cycles of abundance. So the John Hunter's space gun, theoretically speaking, can send, like, imagine you have 1,000 of these John Hunter space gun in some enclosed space. So you have an area of, I don't know, say a couple of different square kilometers, and I don't know, like I don't know what amount of area. I haven't done the math here, but if you have 1,000 of these space guns, and you have some kind of a payload, and you theoretically speaking, you only need to send a 3D printer in orbit. So you build some 3D printer and you deliver it in space, whether it's through a rocket or something else. And then the 3D printer would need materials to work with. And what you would then do is you would just feed the 3D printer ore, and the ore is going to be sent through John Hunter's space gun. So you're going to have like a couple of these, like I said, it doesn't have to be 1,000. Maybe it's going to be 500, or maybe it's going to be less. It depends how fast you want to materialize stuff. And what you do is you would use some kind of a machine vision or machine learning, algorithm, in order to be able to precisely assess in advance what direction will something be fired at, what is the wind like in different areas of the atmosphere, the stratosphere, whatnot. And all these calculations is going to make a very precise shot, and it's going to send it exactly where it needs to be. It won't be off even by a millimeter in space, and it's going to stop right there. So all of these things will be factored in advance, but you're going to do it in such a way that it hits the target every single time. And your goal would be to have this payload delivered in a very tiny space. So say if this is just a random example, but if this was the area whereby you were trying to shoot something in orbit, then the John Hunter space gun, which would be distributed, these are all distributed, right? Or you could like kind of daisy chain stuff as well. You can put the payload in quick succession, it just reloads and fires, and it's delivered to this construct, and this construct just picks it up and it starts pumping that ore into the 3D printer. And then when you do that, then you have the beginnings of the foundations. And this is where I go with when it relates to taking the preliminary steps towards stage 2, which I call opening up the frontier. And these are just 3 or couple from like the many different ideas. Like when we brainstorm in a mastermind kind of a sense, many new ideas will come about, and tens of thousands of companies are going to be launched all over the world in order to deliver, and they like the youth and not just in a like the youths, but many other individuals will contribute and bring their creative ideation and imagination to this reality, and they will build things that may have not been conceived before, baby. And all of it has to be based on the current trend of technology and science, but that's what's going to happen. But these are some of the ways by which the concrete steps towards stage 2 can come about. And this goes back to the vision of, like, this goes back to visionaries like Eric Drexler and Gerard O'Neill, Sir Freeman Dyson, Sir Freeman Dyson, Ted Nelson, Peter Diamandis, and many others who have carried the baton and kept this vision alive for an extended amount of time. Definitely since the 60s, for some of these individuals, going back to the 90s for individuals like Peter Diamandis with the Ansari X Prize, and with the pioneering work that he's doing now with planetary resources, human longevity related work, as well as the X Prize itself, and a couple of other individuals. There's I think 8 or 9 companies that Peter's involved with. Anyway, so coming back to what I'm saying is that these are just a couple of ideas in order to be able to get to this next stage when it pertains to getting more payload in orbit. And these are just some of the ideas I can think of. I don't see anything standing in the way of us becoming a multi-planetary species. And that's how we will take concrete steps towards stage 2, whereby we're going to start seeing the development of lunar colonies, underground colonies, and geodesic domes on the Martian surface. That's Elon Musk's vision, which will evolve and grow richer with time. It's going to happen for sure. You're going to have like different kind of propulsion systems on some of these habitats with low gravity, specifically the lunar surface, so that you propel something with like some kind of a it's not a ray gun, but like it goes really fast and it just releases it. So it's kind of like a I don't have a good example. I don't know what these structures are called, but think of it as like a really fast train, and with like rocket boosters, and you shoot it, and it generates speed, and then it takes off, and then it turns on the thruster. So because it's a low gravity environment, you need something like that in order to be able to escape escape at a particular direction. If I'm doing it justice, you will have energy extraction systems in orbit. So you're going to start putting up a lot of these like solar structures in space, and maybe even redirect energy. Again, everything for peaceful purposes. And so an interesting and diverse set of activities will come about. The colonies will start materializing. I don't know how the initial set of experiments will be done, whether so that the whole nature of a lot more employment is going to happen. I don't know how work will change, but there's going to be a lot of, like, just like there are a lot of jobs in the service industry right now, in particular skills trading, then it's going to evolve into domains whereby the human and machine interaction takes on an altogether different level, and it evolves in a diverse set of ways. So I can totally see a lot of people employed when it relates to operating remote machinery, and you're going to be doing maybe 4 or 5 hours of such work a day, obviously with breaks in between, and the prospect of upward mobility, because you don't want to have this kind of work be taking a toll on somebody's joints and whatnot. Eventually machine vision will be able to power a lot of these goals, as well artificial intelligence in a narrow sense, narrow AI in general. But I think it makes sense to have the human in the loop for a variety of different reasons. And but the work week will shrink. It will go from whatever it is, 40, 45 hours, 50 hours a week to 40 hours. Let's cut it like so 40, 45 hours is the general. I think is the norm. 45 hours if you factor in the lunch breaks and other breaks. So 40 to 48 hours. I think is going to crunch or shrink down to, at least for the next 10 years, to 20 hours, 20 to 30 hours, 20 to 25 hours, I would say 25 to 28 hours. And like I said, you'll be doing deep work, even in the skills domain. you're going to be remotely operating a lot of this machinery, but there will be things like brain-machine interfaces that will be optimizing your decision making. I have like a concrete vision of how all these things will evolve, but that's how I can anticipate how a lot of this work's going to happen. And I was looking at the pictures and now looking at myself talking in front of the camera. I don't know why I'm laughing at that. But yeah, this powers a whole set of realities in stage 2. You have energy systems, you have tourism space, hotels in space, thriving industry within the next 20 years. Probably Virgin Galactic's gonna take the lead here, but you can rest like there's gonna be other contenders. Maybe Airbnb is gonna jump into this area. I don't know how that will, like, you were talking like there's going to be property in space and whatnot, but you don't want like that to just mushroom out of control, that growth, and there's like a band of like a ring of settlements going around orbit. You don't want to stay comfortable there. You want to go beyond. So you want to use that as a launching pad for successive missions to go into like creating bigger structures like in the outer orbit, or I don't know how the geocentric orbits really work, but if you can plug something in orbit somewhere that could sustain a couple of thousand, couple of tens of thousand, couple 100,000 people, that would be great. That would be a great avenue for ensuring the continuity of life and towards creating platforms which will power successive voyages in the outer world. So that would then in effect lead to a transition to stage 3. By this time, I anticipate this is probably going to be, again, all of this goes back to how you look at things, and it doesn't have to be sequential. And what I meant by the tweaking of the systems was that we do everything right now. We do antimatter drives, we do different kinds of propulsion, we do synthetic biology advances, we do advanced genetics. We focus on basics genetics first. The genetics has been evolving for a couple of decades, if not almost a century. Mendelian, I don't know how far it goes back to Mendelian genetics. I don't know anything about genetics. I don't even know the basics. But and material science and computation in general, and further breakthroughs in physics, which is a very, very broad term. But you need specific breakthroughs in order to be able to power this vision of making life not just interplanetary, but you're powering indefinite life extension in a way. And these are just some ideas on how this can be done. But I fully anticipate that within a span of 25 years to 35, between 20 years to 40 years, we're going to have a lot more computation. I think there's a very high degree of probability that between this time frame, it could be lesser actually, it could be like 15 years out. Depends on how some of the breakthroughs come about. But I can totally anticipate us printing entire bodily structures and through some construct transferring the sum total of our memories into this new bodily structure. And that would be a way of ensuring indefinite life extension. So I can totally see that happening between now and sometime spectrum. And the question then becomes one of how to continue to power these voyages and to continue to build the settlements in a sustainable way. And I think the intent should be to try to live as sustainably as possible and as ethically as possible, so that life continues to thrive across the farther reaches of the galaxy, at the very least, for an indefinite amount of time. And I come to this conclusion with the mindset that we shouldn't be species that go from planet to planet to planet, overtaking all of that, all of the resources, and wiping out the life that exists on these planets. I don't even think we should be in the camp whereby we are merging with the life on that planet, as in, like, through some construct we come up with the ability, we absorb the microbiota, and somehow our DNA is in sync with the alien microbiota or microbial DNA. So you could, like, argue that's a regressive, not as developed or complex, however you want to categorize it, of a life form compared to the evolution of biology on Earth or terrestrial sense. And you could have an argument saying, well, we're just gonna absorb their DNA in 2 hours, and that is an ethical. I don't think it's an ethical decision, because we have no way how some of those life forms will evolve on a 100 million to a billion year time frame. I'm pretty sure I know I'm not the only one who thinks that way, because when I discuss the prospects of sending probes to Europa, there have been some individuals who have come back and say, okay, that's what you want to do. You got to absolutely make sure that the probes you're sending are super hygienic. And this is very, I think it's a valid statement to make. I'm still gonna go to Europe though. I think so. I will. It's gonna be a very clean switch and back. So in stage 3, there's talk a fair bit about I call it the settlements. So I spoke about this. I've got a note there saying, my computer's gonna run out of battery. Let's make sure. You can look at my smiley face in the meanwhile. So I'm talking about computation, talking about Moore's law. This post was made 2015, and I think the gentleman from NVIDIA, I forget his name, but they're saying he's come up with some kind of a law. I think it's called Huang's law. I could be wrong. But I have a note here. I haven't edited this blog post in a while. But it says what is coming after Moore's law, and that gentleman's come up with something that some are saying could be after, like something that, like, could. It is that thing that could replace Moore's law. I'm gonna plug this laptop in. So I'm talking about the ability to be able to rearrange atoms, because computation will allow that. That's really what nanotechnology is. And then I'm positing that such developments and more would lay down the underpinnings of powering a newer form of computing. Then I make another note saying that certain activities and sub-activities would have to be balanced, relating to the procurement of advanced energy systems and good talent. Okay, so that's a thought relating to, like, so you need energy systems. Maybe I'm thinking like fusion powered. Maybe other sources of energy. I don't know what would it be. I don't know the means to be able to generate energy using cyclotrons or particle accelerators. I guess I can't comment on that. I don't know much about dark energy or dark matter, or negative energy and how to extract them, so I can't comment on that. Good talent would mean something that I just mentioned, that most, if not all, should be engaged with the ability to be able to contribute to the scientific discoveries and advancement, and by tweaking the system and by enabling more trust in a quantifiable way, you can do that. I don't think it's as audacious a goal, and I think it's very possible. Sorry, I just gotta plug this in. For phase 3, I mentioned that relating to the acquisition of talent, the systems for education and training in the future are going to be somewhat different versus what we have today. Largely, and by this time, and amongst other things, a collective yet distributed form of intelligence will emerge. Most constructs would first be simulated and modeled in virtual constructs and on a scale which would be referred to as parallel realities. There's a couple of things here. It's an interesting, if I can say so myself, that's a deep thought. So I have my thoughts when it relates to the evolution of the crucial and pivotal educational system that forms as the underpinning of the foundation for continued expansion of life. I have different thoughts on like how I'm with Sir Ken Robinson by and large. There are parts that really work and there are parts that don't work. And my uneducated guess is that the parts that don't work for a substantial percentage of the population that's going through the education system. And it works for the percentage that go on to attain not just like contribution in terms of STEM fields, but or contribution to society in general. I think it's a lower number or percentage. So the question is, how can the system be changed whereby more can contribute? And I think it is possible, but I'll reserve those thoughts for another day. The collective yet distributed form of intelligence. This is the internet basically, and got different nodes and it's the different kinds of internet, but the one that we share is the web. There are other things like the dark web and what else is there? There could be other things that I don't know about, but we share the web, and it is a collective yet distributed form of intelligence. The internet will evolve in a series of ways. I don't know if I made a blog post about this or it's in my notes, but the internet will evolve into, like, the blockchain would probably power the next version of the internet, and then all these things that we run on the web right now through the cloud will just be one very tiny part of the internet 2.0, and you will have it depends on which time spectrum, but you will have like all these things like games and like virtual reality constructs, which right now require a fair bit of computation. All of these will be very accessible. Computation will be so cheap in the future, and depends on how you work on the architecture. There's like all these are all interesting and different, very interesting, fascinating questions. And if you talk to specific individuals, you can get all the computation happening all over the world right now, like all the Xbox, all the PlayStations, and all the Atari's got a new console now. All the rendering and all of the machine learning, as in data crunching, and like all the computation you can conceive, all the internet things. Imagine all of that computation. Imagine all these computers that exist right now, and all the supercomputers and modeling systems. You can crunch it to a size like the architecture that powers it all is the size of a cube of sugar. 1 inch by 1 inch wide, something like that. 1.5 inch by. And that is what powers all, like, so that is theoretically possible. How far away are we from powering such a reality? I don't know much about computer architecture in order to be able to answer that question. But going back to a collective yet distributed intelligence, that's what the internet will eventually become, compared to just the apps and data storage and the web itself and other things we use the internet for today, gaming and whatnot. In the future is going to have things like mind files. So you're going to be backing up a portion of your brain, or your mind, sorry, if not the entire mind, on the internet. And there's going to be trust networks. There will be perhaps ancestral simulations. It's very important actually to do ancestral simulation. There has to be an ancestral simulation. I think Elon Musk made a comment along these lines, which was a very, very strong statement to make. But I think there's truth to it. And there will perhaps be like snapshots of your genetic kind of state, to be able to see that something hasn't been altered without your permission, and like things like that. So maybe you're going to be sequenced on a more periodic basis, and they're all going to be super cheap. Like 20 years out, all these things. Right now you pay $1.99 or something like that to 23andMe, but in the future it's going to be like pennies for the entire year. So you're going to be sequencing that much more on a more frequent basis, but it's going to be a lot more richer, is what I mean. And there's going to be all these things and more in order to be able to power the next version of the internet. The trust networks would entail what kind of information is shared amongst which nodes of the network. So the trust becomes a very key component now and in the future. It is all about trust and reputations. And if you have worked hard in order to be able to cultivate, or intelligently is the word, in order to be able to cultivate that reality, I think your future is very, very bright, because it all goes down to trust. And so learn about other, like get out of your comfort zone and learn more about, if somebody's watching this, learn more about others and learn more about the world. And my advice, don't cause friction, unless you I'm just gonna leave it at that. You don't want to cause friction. You want to empathize, and you want to ask, and you want to see how you can encourage something if that's what you want, but realizing that the person that you want to probably changes you. Let's leave it at that. But that's how I think the internet will evolve, and simulation engines are going to get a lot more detailed. If you don't believe in this or anything I say, just think of the evolution of video games in the past 30 years. And the simulation engines will be as real as reality right now. And we're going to be able to simulate a being in these simulation engines from scratch, literally, from building up their nucleotides all the way to cellular structures. We may learn a lot more about the architecture of cells between now and the next 20 years. So cell is a pretty complex thing to my uneducated mind. And then we're going to be able to boot up an entire biophysical body with a complete gene expression driving the creation of different kind of cells, and the cells coming together. And then we're going to be able to introduce different connectome structures into this biophysical body. And then we will be able to see what kind of different expressions lead to different outcomes relating to not just the biophysical being, but also their brain, or eventually their mind. and then we're going to be able to model a lot of these realities to be able to see what basically what we want to test. And these are all going to be very interesting developments. It is an ethical question because I was thinking about this while I was driving, and I was thinking if you can boot up an entire person from pretty not from scratch, because you still got to go down to the level of quarks and other particles, which I don't understand about, so I don't talk about it. I don't know anything about it, so I just don't have that conversation about the quantum world. Right now I cannot. I don't have any. I don't want to wrap my mind around it. Let's put it that way, because I have to pay my rent. But what I'm trying to say is that the ethical question: if you can boot up a person from scratch, and if it is for experimental purposes, and then you plant false memories into their mind, kind of like in a Blade Runner 2049 sense, is that ethical? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I'll just leave it at that. But coming back to the subtopic or subnode that I've made, the collective yet distributed form of intelligence will definitely emerge. It's gonna emerge in a diverse set of ways. It's not just going to be a reality. It's going to be many different forms of realities. And I think the individual entity that can move between these diverse set of realities would benefit and thrive. And so that's the kind of model you want to emulate. You want to, again, do not cause friction and try to see if you can move between these different realities. And a lot of it just comes from talking and empathizing. So I'll leave it at that. So next I say that the two trends that we should keep into perspective is that one, technology can scale exponentially. I forget to add the words can in there. And that a new form of computation or computing will leave the existing computation or computing systems as well as the architecture far, far behind. And the link that I add is to quantum computers. And from what I hear, yet to be verified, is that they work. Quantum computers do work in a functional sense. But what I also understand is that the development is still, even with all the work that has been done, in I don't know how far ago it goes, but it's still in a very preliminary stage, and it requires successive rounds of funding in order to be able to be fruitful. So I don't know if it's going to start delivering results on that 20-year spectrum or beyond, but that's where we are today. And then I make another note. This sounds a little audacious, but then I say perhaps we will even come up with a new form of computing that leaves quantum computing behind. And I say, wouldn't that be something? So I don't know exactly what I was thinking in this realm. Maybe I was thinking, because I don't know how destructive quantum computing is and what kind of information is lost when this computation is happening. But maybe I was thinking of reversible computing, or maybe I was thinking of something else. This goes back to the different forms of computation that have been mentioned by Ray Kurzweil in the book The Singularity is Near. And that's my frame of reference. There could be other forms of computation that I don't know about. Like I've already spoken about computing on denser scales. So, yeah. So these are all the realities. During stage 3, I anticipate we will start building mega structures like O'Neill colonies and the Stanford Torus. And I've put some images that I found on the web for these realities. If you don't know what these are, I would highly encourage you to Google these terms. Go to this blog post, go down to stage 3, look at some of the links, and if they appeal to you, copy and paste these terms: O'Neill colony, Stanford Torus. Go open up a new tab, put them in Google image search, and educate yourself. There is a really fascinating concepts, and this is not science fiction. This goes back to the 60s. Again, based on the work that Gerard O'Neill and Eric Drexler have done. Visioneers is a honest and precise summation of the some of the efforts. It tries to capture the essence of the work that these individuals have done. And yeah, I would highly encourage you to go and do that. Uh, there's many representations in popular culture. The ones that I can think of at the top of my head is from the movie Interstellar, when Matthew McConaughey comes back from that interstellar voyage, and although he's like, I'm not, the time travel aspect is not included as part of this discussion. There's no element of time travel here. That's not part of this scope. But when he does come back, the cylinders are like the O'Neill colony is built, so that you can see that there are kids. There's a ball game happening, and he's kind of sitting on his porch drinking a beer. He's sitting that place is an O'Neill colony, and they name it after him. I think, if I remember correctly. What else? There are smaller scale colonies that kind of have been envisioned in works like 2001: Space Odyssey. All those are kind of like dystopian with like the AI going a little crazy. But yeah, that's why I kind of not want to talk about that. But I mean, AIs are going to be just like humans, and humans go crazy. So I don't see why AIs are not going to go crazy. And then you got to have psychotherapists and psychiatrists that are AIs in order to be able to fix those AIs. Simple stuff. And you got to treat AIs like you would treat humans. Some of these things are really simple. I don't know why we're making a big deal out of them. But how you're going to implement that is another thing. So I continue talking about, I talk a fair bit about stage 3. And I kind of go back to the foundations that will be developed in stage 2, which is really the enablement of platform. And I mentioned specific companies that are working on enabling this platform. I say that we will witness that the creation of colonies and toruses, Stanford Torus and O'Neill colonies, which I already mentioned. We're going to see lunar colonies during this time, like fully operational, mining helium-3, and we may even find elements that have not been discovered previously on the periodic table. A colony or a series of colony on Mars would be functional. A collection of colonies on Europa, many colonies and mining facilities on the surface of asteroids. I'd like to add that within 20 years, I haven't added that in the blog post, but I predict that within 20 years, we will have the means and capacity to be able to suck most of the CO2 out of the Venetian or the surface of Venus, and we will be able to then take concrete steps in order to be able to power the dream of terraforming that planet to the best of my abilities. The prospects of life, how we have witnessed it so far emerging on the surface of Venus, is very low in probabilistic terms, with like 18-degree Fahrenheit temperatures on the surface. Very low probability. However, there could be life in the crevices and surface, and again, we make that ethical choice of how that's going to come about. The blog posts continue. I make other comments in terms of other sciences that would have been developing, and some that will be fully matured by this time. So I'm probably thinking things like synthetic biology, which are still, from what I understand, in their preliminary stage, even though a lot of work has happened in the past 2 decades at the very least. Same with genetics. The prospect of genetics, in my opinion, is to I don't want to bind my vision with the goal. I don't know if there's a goal, because this is all basic research, and we're going to find a lot more as we continue to peer at these things. But one of them should be the eradication of diseases. The other one, maybe eradication is not it's a good word. Like, we don't need disease, especially chronic diseases, rare diseases. Somebody who suffers from one, I don't want anyone to suffer, and so cancers and whatnot, these things will all be cured by further pushing genetics and other developments. and death will be conquered. So if you want to live indefinitely, you can, and if you don't, that's your prerogative. That's your choice, actually. So a lot of these come from, and abundance of food is a reality. You can grow anything you want, and you can, whether plant life or protein, or like you call it animals right now, but your protein doesn't have to come from a live body. You can just make it in the future, and you can even have genetic diversity programmed into it, so you're not eating like cloned meat all the time. And some people may not like this particular set of ideas, but this is really where we're going. I don't think there is a way. If you're going to power these giant settlements, you're not going to be hauling livestock, or like you're not going to have 50,000 acres of field dedicated just for growing wheat. You're just not going to have it. So you're going to have to figure out more intelligent ways of being able to procure your food and nutritional needs, at least for the next little while. So I'll leave it at that. So I do mention synthetic biology in there. Yeah, there's a couple of, if I can say so, interesting points in there. So I say that stage 3 would involve mapping all the known surfaces across the solar system in intricate details. So kind of like think Google Maps Street View across the solar system, including surface areas, underwater facilities of all sorts, caves. And this will be possible because machines would be so tiny by this time. Right now, for us to send a robotic structure somewhere, so you could, like, I don't know how small, like the smallest drone that's known right now is probably about the size of a coin. There may be some millimeter scale machines, but I don't know if we're using them to map surfaces, so to speak. But you'd be able to do that in the future because machines are going to be super tiny, and you could just spread them out, and they would do the scan, and then they would kind of like light up a wider thing which you could kind of explore at the very least. And it's not going to be through this human-computer interaction. These would be detailed virtual simulations on a very high resolution, whereby you're not going to be able to tell the difference between what you're experiencing and telling it from like it's a virtual experience, but it's going to be super real. And there's going to be AIs, narrow AIs, that are going to help you make sense out of what you're seeing. So you might want to skip a lot of this stuff, like if you're going through some habitat, and like for, I don't know, so if you were going in there through a flesh and blood body, say you might have to walk for 2 hours, right? Something like that, till a point comes where there's something interesting. So anyway, this is a random example, but where the AI would be trained to say, well, this is just like the terrain just kind of looks like this for the next little X duration or some parameter. Would you like me to skip to that? And you will just think it, and you will be there, because the AI has already been there, and it's just like it's actually syncing a portion of that memory. It's not even a visual image, like a memory, and it's going to be augmented with richer experience. So maybe you'll be able to smell it, and maybe even taste it, and hear the auditory. It's going to be a full, deep, immersive experience in virtual, and that's how you're going to be able to experience reality, at least throughout the solar system, including virtual worlds. So people are going to be spending more and more time in the virtual worlds. That's going to be a pretty big industry, I think. Exploration and like virtual travel is going to be a huge industry. I don't want to put a number on it, but it's going to be a massive, like whoever's thinking of exploring, or like, so one of the reasons I started Experience Labs is because I believe in enabling the experiential economy. And anyway, so That's a huge area, and being there in flesh and blood is going to be reserved, and it's going to be super expensive. I think. I think I'm not sure. I could be like it was the price to send a payload to certain location, but the like it depends, right? Because right now you can get to pretty much any point on Earth for like it's not that much of a difference. I mean, if I can get from Toronto to like super random example, Toronto to Bali or Toronto to Malaysia or some other place like Australia for say less than $2,000. Then for me to get to Toronto from Toronto to like some small tropical island in the middle of the Pacific would maybe cost me $5,000. So it's not really like an exponential increase. It's just a one or like a doubling and a half. So anyway, so maybe it's going to be the same for visiting places in flesh and blood. Um, One thing I don't mention in the blog post is something called the ITN. It stands for the Interplanetary Network, and it's a you can kind of think of it as a solar system, like subway system. And what's already there is these gravity wells, and there's a gentleman by the name of Shane Ross, whose his videos are available on YouTube. So you can Google Shane Ross, the Everhart lecture series through the California Institute of Technology, when I guess that was his alma mater, and he talks about these gravity wells, and these are these tubes going across the solar system, and if you can get on these wells, you can actually go tube hopping, and you don't have to use a lot of propellant or any kind of propulsion system, or not to that degree. So you can literally go tube hopping, and you can use this as a transportation hub in order to be able to get from different points across the solar system. So from here to Mars, Mars to Jupiter, Jupiter somewhere else. And again, if you want to learn more, Google Shane Ross Gravity Wells. Shane, ROSS, Gravity Wells, WELLS. Where I'm going with this is just like President Eisenhower played a critical role when it comes to the enablement of the interstate highway. Similarly, during some time between now and the next 30 years, the development of the solar system wide, or ITN, Interplanetary Network, will also come about, and it's going to open up a lot of real estate. There's going to be a lot of real estate opening up. It's going to be a wonderful future. You're going to be spending a lot of time at the cottage, chilling out, enjoying real world, like reality, and a lot of amazing virtual reality. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful reality. You can do whatever you want. You can have access to all the scientific knowledge, all the books in the world, unlimited arts and culture for you to experience. There's a lot of poetry. You can experience flowers in real world. Robots are going to tend the gardens, or in the virtual world, and there's going to be robots helping elderly assist, and there's going to be translation happening real time, so you can understand what somebody from another background is saying, maybe helping them. And there's going to be people teaching each other, and there's going to be less of suffering. A lot of suffering that's avoidable will be avoided. There will be more hope, more healing, and more pleasure. That's where we're going. This is coming. These three words, this hope, healing, pleasure, comes from John Marlowe, who is my friend, my recent friend through the U.S. Transhumanist Party. And Marlowe suffers from a rare disease which hasn't been diagnosed. And I was talking to him, spoken to him a couple of times, I haven't met him as of yet, but he's a person I think he will be my friend in the future. There's a very high degree of probability because he accepts me for who I am, and I haven't shared all of my life history with him. Maybe like I don't know. Like, so what I'm saying is, Marlowe has a rare genetic disease, and it's not diagnosed. That's another big reason why these advancements are needed, so that we have the ability for people like Marlowe to experience the simple joys of life. He's not able to appreciate, or not appreciate, but enjoy the simple things like going for a run for 45 minutes, or pushing weights, or like every day, or being able to focus even on a task for 5 hours at a stretch. Not like consistently, but like you take breaks. I think at least for that one, some of these things, I could be wrong. I haven't shared, like he hasn't shared all these, but he told me that because the metabolism is not happening on the same scale that would happen for somebody like you, or somebody watching this video, it leads to weakness of sorts, like in a biophysical sense, and it has to do with something on a genetic level, because it has to do with the creation of certain enzymes, peptides in the body, which are not happening. So it's the inability to be able to, I think, convert fat, if I understand, and absorb that energy for the biophysical functions that the body. So that's the way I understand it. I could be wrong. I gotta review my discussion again, but it's another reason for enabling some of these technologies. There's going to be many benefits. So going back to stage 3, I also talk about the rise of I'm talking about mapping our street and our indoor surroundings. And I think we're going to be living in a radically transparent society in 25 years. Going back to that thought about trust, the trust network, there will be people who will be backing up their mind on the construct. I wouldn't just call it the cloud, because it's going to be beyond the cloud at that point. And because there will be different people checking on different, like metaphorically speaking, different parts like constructs, they will share that much more knowledge amongst them, and they will curate knowledge, new knowledge. They will curate. They will push the frontiers of certain developments, all in from the perspective of the scientific principle, and they will choose to share this knowledge with specific group of people, which they will determine and predicate who they want to. So it changes very differently from the models today, to giving more autonomy to the individual, and also to the individual that the individual chooses to be a part of. So that we're talking about groups then. So it's the sharing of knowledge based on group and individual alliances, and that's where I think that part is going. I talk also about the rise of ubiquitous computing. This is an area I'm personally passionate about and I want to innovate in. And I talk about the proliferation, maybe that's not a good word to use, of advanced, it should be advanced, not advances, advanced sensors driving this phenomena. I totally see this happening on a 20-year time spectrum. The way we access computing today, again, which is predicated on designs pioneered by individuals like Douglas Engelbart, are totally going to give way to these new realities. Computing would be available anytime, anywhere you need it. It would be exponentially more advanced compared to the computation available today. And you will not just have perfect knowledge, but at some point, you contingent on your ability to be able to contribute and the alliances that you choose to make. You may even be able to do a lot of detailed simulations by simply thinking about them in order to be able to deduce certain outputs or outcomes. Now, the things with simulation, specifically something that has not been quantified before, like some weird phenomena, is that there are still simulations, and they're not going to be super accurate to the dot, but they will give you some representation. And we're talking about different layers of complexity and whatnot, so I'm not like going to talk about that too much because I don't understand chaos theory and other subjects like that at all. But you will be able to do certain simulations, and this is why it is so important to enable a radically transparent society there, whereby individuals have the ability to be able to choose and pursue their passion and how they determine it. As well, ethics is something that should be taught from an early age, and I don't know how that's going to be done. I haven't really studied ethics myself. I consider myself to be a very ethical person. I really struggle with the decisions I make now and in the future. And these are difficult decisions to make, but intuitively I kind of know what to do. But when it comes to doing it, it's very difficult in some cases. And it's not difficult in other cases because it's just something you do. Difficult from the choice that you make some choices whereby you kind of think, did I make the right choice? And also you look back at your younger years. I don't think about that too much because I was talking to somebody about this. I've been soliciting a lot of feedback about this, but I mean we're kind of going off topic. But what I'm trying to say is, you look back and you think about the times where you kind of like, now I'm 39, but I'm looking back at previously. Some of my actions may have been not as conscious, and like the intention piece was not really like you have a down path. So these things do sit on your consciousness, and that's why ethics again is an important, again, something that should be mandatory. But I'm not going to force that opinion on anyone. I do think that computation will be ubiquitous, so that's just kind of going back to that topic. Still talking about mapping the surroundings. I say that mapping the surface, the various surfaces on the different habitats, is not going to be a multi-generational endeavor. Makes sense. You can probably do that within a span of a couple of years, if not less. And then you can just keep upgrading the sensors. You just send some architecture there and you upgrade the code, and it just kind of does the work, and it just moves around however it's going to be done. Like I say, migrations to such man-made habitat will also happen quickly. Hold on, what did I say here? I'm getting tired now. Talk about natural and man-made environments. Well, this is contingent on how terraforming is happening on the natural environments and the planetary bodies that have existed for a couple of billion years. Whereas the man-made environments, as in O'Neill colonies and Stanford Torus, you have a lot more degree of latitude with respect to the changes you can architect. So migration to those constructs, theoretically speaking, is going to be happening a lot more faster versus migration to, I think it's all contingent on how you do it. Like you could have geodesic domes on Mars and other habitat, and you could also have migrations happening to other like these facilities in a relatively faster sense. The thing is gravity. That's the thing. For there to be low gravity on some of these surfaces, like Mars has lower gravity compared to Earth. Venus has like not almost similar, but very close. If Earth's gravity is here, Venus's gravity is here, and Mars's gravity is here. I think, if I recall from my memory. So Venus is a lot closer to Earth in terms of the gravitational pull on its surface, and how it's manifested, where the manifestation, the translation of how that translates to our biophysical body, at the very least, is something that's to be determined. And that's why we need to run simulations at the very least, in computers and also in flesh and blood bodies. There's a bunch of ways by which you could do that in an ethical sense, but that's a conversation for another day. But gravity is the thing to figure out, but the migrations will, I think, overall happen relatively quickly. And if it does turn out that in 20, 25, 30 years, we're able to make the switch from bodies to bodies, which some don't see as, I'm not going to focus, I'm only going to focus on the positive. You can do it in a clean switch, and you can make it completely ethical, as in like boot up a body from scratch. I'm not saying body transplants or anything like that, because that could totally power unethical behavior. I'm not promoting that or obviously condoning that at all. Just like organ transplant is a industry that is developing, mostly in the East Coast of the United States, body transplants would also be a reality. And I've heard there's some dystopian representation of such a reality in popular culture. I'm not going to say which TV show or whatnot, but or media, but it doesn't have to be dystopian. I don't understand why certain segments across the media industry have gone so dystopian. At least there should be a counter narrative whereby there is a rational and or at least a nuanced and balanced counter argument to however such transhumanist realities are being depicted. At least if it's not going to be, like, I'm not going to repeat myself, if this is a representation, then there should be a counter representation to balance such a reality. I talk about further advances in AI, robotics, astrophysics, astronomy, as well as advances in computing. And these advances would allow us to map the farther corners of the solar system. I would add to that list that there will be the ability with being able to send probes to different parts outside of the solar system, as well as more computation available. At least when it comes to the spectral analysis, we would have the ability to be able to light up different portions of the galaxy. Light up mean like a more detailed, precise models of what exists beyond the solar system. And some functional examples would include things like an actual picture of the surface of an exoplanet. I'm very confident of this prediction. Like it does require further breakthroughs, and I guess I got to look at the timeline too, because if Zuckerberg's Starshot project can indeed be powered close to the speed of light, even if it's 80%, I don't know what speeds will it eventually attain. So say it takes 9 years to get there, 10 years to get there. Take a snapshot, beam the thing back, and if the signal travels, or I don't know how it's going to get back, but like 9 years to get there and 50 years back, 15 years to go back, or like, something like that. So that's 24 years. So we should technically, well, functionally, theoretically speaking, we should start getting, gotta get some water. We should start seeing results back from some of these habitats within now and 30 years. That would be remarkable, to actually get an image back from an off-world, truly off-world place. This is a planet surrounding or going around another star system, and to capture an image from a planet around another star system would be a key and defining moment in human machine history. I don't even know what it's gonna like. There's a lot of artists' representation when it comes to some of these worlds. There may be a lot of water at some of these. Some of them may have a lot of water plus like a lot of rocky surface. There could be a whole range, like in almost infinite range of habitats, at least in a geological and a topological sense, in atmospheric sense, and as it relates to these worlds. And if you look at the graph of exoplanets starting to go like this, and more are going to be found thanks to the Seeger equation, Sarah Seeger. And I predict that we should start getting images from some of these places between now and 30 years, give or take, plus minus 5 or 10 years. That would be very interesting. Then I mentioned that then I make a point about the sentient life, non-Earth based sentient life, and how big that will be during phase 3 of the when it relates to the different phases of discovery and colonization. I guess the real question is what is meant by sentient. I made another video about the required energy needs for mind files or cog models. There's at least 2 different categories here with a lot of subdevelopments, and they will require energy. I don't know what the energy needs are going to be. Depends on how you structure the algorithms, at least in a virtual sense, and then perhaps in this operating in this domain. So it depends again what's meant by sentient. But if you just considered human, transhuman, and all others like categories, if as they may exist, as well, mind files, cyborgian life. Sorry, not include mind files. So cyborgs and human and transhuman. I think it's still probably going to follow some kind of a progression that has been following. We're kind of looking at the tapering off or like flatlining of the population growth curve because people are going to stop having 5 or 6 children, whatever is the average in developing economies. It's starting to trend lower and lower. Let's starting to trend towards 2.5, something like that. I think eventually it's going to be 2, and then maybe less than 2. So there will be cyborgs though, and the definition of cyborgs is not how it's depicted in science fiction. It's much more humane. It's like they're cyborgs within. We're all cyborgs in a sense because everyone's got a smartphone attached to their hip. As well, not everyone has things like cochlear implants or LASIK surgery, but technically speaking, you're a cyborg if you have those. You have those abilities. Cyborgian, in a future sense, probably like it means that you have some kind of a human, brain machine interface, which will just going to be so small and ubiquitous that they're just going to be naturally part of your body. And I mean naturally because maybe you are going to be able to model computers in a biological sense or some kind of a sensor attached to your biology, which is very, very safe and completely safe and secure, not carcinogenic at all, and it gives you the ability to be able to control your portions of your like homeostatic needs and the machinery in and around you that is required for your sustenance, like your I don't know how like a lot of these systems, like maybe you've got things growing in your backyard or in your own greenhouse on Mars and Venus, and you're going to be able to control all these things with your mind. Pretty much, you will just think about a lot of these things and they will happen, as well as the delivery of a lot of goods and nutrients and other things required in order to be able to power a quality life for you. And that's what I mean by how we're going to be interacting with computers. I'll keep it at that. And next, I say if the rate of expansion continues at a steady progression, then some resource constraints will be felt. These constraints will necessitate that sentient life forms work on finding and building newer habitats that they call home. The resource constraint again has to do with population trends um, you know, this this thing we inhabit, again, if we continue to expand in this form, so I don't know at what point, are we talking, like, I don't know what the population is going to be like in 2045 or 2055. So right now, 2018, 28, 38, 48, 58. So by the 2058, so close to the 2060s, almost 40 years have passed, and give or take a couple of years. And I haven't done any progression. I've played with R or any one of these statistical models in terms of projections. But say the population now in the solar system is, I don't know, 20 billion. So you got like 200 million people living on, or 500 million people living on Mars by now. Venus has been terraformed successfully, and it's Earth 2.0. Technically speaking, so close to Earth. It even looks like Earth from space. It feels like Earth when you're there. Sorry, Elon Musk. And I would put Venus's population probably at between 6 or 8 billion. And I don't know what Earth's population is going to be like. We're probably going to see a reduction in numbers because we're going to need that in order to be able to, because the trends are going to start reversing for the biological ecosystem. The Earth's going to be healing, basically going to go through a process of healing, and there's going to be depopulation in a lot of the areas, and we're going to start dedicated land solely for just life to evolve, in order to be able to just kind of like the ecosystem starts again restoring itself. Let nature do the work is the answer, with some help from humans and transhumans. I think like I honestly don't know what the population is. Like depends how things pan out, but like between 25 to 40 billion seems like a uneducated guess, which is really what it is. It's not an educated guess. But yeah, that's going to be the population. There's going to be smaller populations on O'Neill colonies and Stanford toruses, probably in the marks of a couple 100,000, a couple of million max amongst these different habitats. There's going to be very small, tiny pockets on asteroids and other smaller structures. I don't know how big comets are, so I doubt it's going to be building settlements on a comet a couple of kilometers wide. Technically speaking, that's an asteroid. I don't know the difference between an asteroid and a comet, but yeah, that's this thinking about this in terms of resource constraints. The things that again come at the top of my mind are solar again and nuclear fusion, or fusion in general. Sorry, and maybe the fusion will be a reality by then. Maybe not. Maybe there will be newer ways of extracting energy. But that's the constraint. It all goes down to energy, even with all this population growth. So that's going to be the factor. And one important thing to note is it's not really a given that future civilizations will choose to live on the surface. That's a very important point, because if you have an abundance of energy, then theoretically speaking, you could just blow a bubble inside the crust, and I've made videos about this as well. I can mention this in specific. Like you could blow a bubble on some, like I don't know how this is gonna affect the tectonic plates in and around, but if you can do that sustainably without altering too much outside in the crust or the mantle or the outer mantle, whatnot, and you can just blow a bubble in the crust, and you have some construct and real power energy, and you can just live in that bubble. And you could have a series of these bubbles throughout, which could, in effect, in theory, sustain a pretty decent population. So there's another something to think about, that how we think about space is more of a mind kind of a concept, because we've evolved on the surface as a species for at least 60 million years, since the time of the last extinction cycle, from Purgatorius to all these other subspecies, finally to Homo sapiens. But we don't have to continue to live on the surface. Something to think about. The most successful species on this planet, I can think of bacteria, and there's more bacteria in the soil than on the surface, I believe. So it probably says something. One of the smartest, well, not the smartest, sorry, the most successful species that have evolved pre-dinosaur era probably goes back a couple of million years, if not billion years. Yeah, I think microbial evolution has been happening for billions of years. So there's probably a reason why they choose to live under surface. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with, maybe there is intelligence in these beings, and maybe not. I don't really know. Another thing I don't mention in this blog post or in this video, but I think, oh geez, my computer is still recording. I'm just looking at myself because I was looking at the blog post. Another thing that's going to happen is the AIs are going to become self-aware, and we have an opportunity to guide their evolution by taking specific steps right now. So I envision there's going to be a bunch of different realities, but one of the things that's going to happen is the AIs are most probably going to evolve as vessels. So these are going to be, think of them as giant vessels or ships. And like, I really mean giant. Like, imagine a construct or a ship that can house 10,000 to 100,000, maybe a million people. Although it's not such a good idea to put all these people in one stretch. But it's not going to be like an ark or a ship that just keeps extending way into the periphery of, like, you would watch it like something from like a sci-fi movie that's dystopian. Because for any given reason, even if you build redundant fault-tolerant systems and you run it through a lot of simulations, it's still one thing. And if it fails, then all of the beings inhabiting that vessel are at risk. So that's not a good model. So you want to build like some size. I don't know what the ideal size would be. But what the thing is, these things are going to be autonomous. They will have their own perception. They will make their own decisions by and large. They will choose to go from place to place and how they determine it. Maybe there will be, this is a little far-fetched, but maybe they will be made out of biological material as opposed to metallic or synthetic carbonite structures. And as they are made out of synthetic material, maybe something will be put in their code, in their genetic code, for there to be, for them to evolve, and so they could come together, and we could program some kind of structures in their logic whereby they will have companionship like humans do, and they'll come together and they will have offsprings. This all seems far-fetched, but if you actually think about it, it could be one of the most interesting ways by which life could continue to evolve throughout the galaxy. And what we do then as a species is just have a great time. We enjoy ourselves. We inhabit the insides of these creatures. And again, these are not going to be vessels and how we have envisioned them historically in like science fiction, when either Star Trek or Star Wars with a finite size fitting a couple of thousand people in there. I haven't read on Ian Banks too much in order to be able to think about this more, but these will be closed systems that are fully autonomous, fully functioning from the perspective of how these closed loop systems work. And yeah, just something that I think it's very possible that the 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 the, the vessels at some point become self-aware and autonomous, but and they will have the perception that there are beings inside of their bodies, for lack of a better word. But what they might not, like, they will be quite busy with the inner workings of their mind to be able to think too much about what is, and maybe that's who we are with trillions of bacteria in our body. It kind of reminds me of words from Naveen Jain. I think he made some comments along those lines, saying that, well, maybe billions of years ago, bacteria thought, why don't we create these bags of cytoplasm and just inhabit their bodies, and they will go from place to place, and we'll just live there for an indefinite amount of time. Because for bacteria, 40 years is a long time, or 60 years, 100 years. Not saying all bacteria actually live that. I'm paraphrasing, but no, you didn't. Look, this is a recording. Phase 4. In Phase 4, we will have the critical mass to power voyages in the realms of mining, exploration, scientific endeavors, commercial, leisure, travel, colonization, exploration, and other facilities. It's probably a couple of redundant words there. The critical mass across the solar system will necessitate the creation of larger structures. As sentient life form continues moving up on the Kardashev scale, the constructs it will enable would probably come in the form of a ring world, as envisioned by Larry Niven, or even a Dyson sphere or a Dyson swarm. I suspect that stage 4 is a couple of 100 years out. I would revise this note to indicate that I do not think it is a couple of 100 years out. It depends on what we decide. I can see this reality being, depends on, I think one of the core components is, again, energy, and the other one is nanotechnology. And further breakthroughs in a couple other domains. I don't know what is going to power the magnetosphere around this structure. Maybe you can create a glass enclosing or something else in order to be able to filter through the UV rays and the radiation. Plasma fields or magnetic shields. I don't know anything about that. That sounds very science fiction-y. Who knows how the future will unfold? But I could see the framework of something like a ring world or a Dyson sphere. You could start tinkering with this on a 25 to 30 year spectrum, at least from a preliminary sense. It's not going to be fully functional, but this is what gets you really, really huge numbers. If you can create a ring world, I think I'm trying to recall this from memory. I think Larry Niven's ring world had a population of 100 billion. Let's Google it. I haven't read the book. I have not. I cannot successfully Google the population size of Larry Niven's ring world, but there's such an enormous amount of mass that has just been procured, and there's a lot of mass floating around the asteroid belt, especially the area between Mars and Jupiter, which could power something like this. I don't know what the ideal real estate would be. Like, so I've talked to a couple of astrophysicists in terms of And maybe you could build it in a modular fashion so that the orbit could be, uh, well, moved, for lack of a better word. Although there's going to be an interesting endeavor, but maybe it can kind of like shrink or expand based on how you construct it. And as you do that, this is a very this is going to be a very complex mechanical and civil engineering endeavor, because this is very theoretical, because I don't like, how do you build this? Like, are you building this with self-replicating nanostructures? And if you do that, then how do you move it about? How do you make it bigger, smaller, with the core intent of like changing the orbital, like the distance from the sun, and other factors, maybe like the heliocentric um, orbits there's a probability that they're going to come in contact, so you might have to move it from time to time. It may have to disband and come to. There's all these complex things, the questions that need to be answered. But I suspected 2.5 years ago that something like a ring world or Dyson sphere is a couple hundred years out. Again, I don't think so. Could be here much sooner than we expect. I use the words, once designs in phase or stage 4 are exploited, then sentient life form would not have much of a choice than to either create a new star or find other habitats. I don't know how a new star is going to be created on that level. I know we can create. I think we can create stars in a lab environment, but I mean, that's what fusion is technically. It's technically speaking, fusion is the same power, the same phenomena that powers stars. But I don't know if we're going to be able to do that on a scale that, like and not even a scale that could sustain a population of a couple of 100 million people. Yeah, I don't know much about how star formation with the accretion of dust and gases and how it actually happens on a, well, galactic sense at the very least, not a universal sense. So I don't know what I was thinking here. Finding other habitats most probably means I'm thinking about the voyage to the next star system. Oh, I do continue that the former I think is going to prove to be a much more difficult endeavor versus the latter. As the former, I suspect, will require unimaginable amounts of computing. I think multivacs. Oh, interesting. Excuse me, because multivacs, the last question in Asimov's sense, that's a short story that he wrote, was focused on the question of reversing entropy. So okay, maybe okay. So I see where I was coming from. Then I continue. Hence, the imperative for some sentient life form for them to leave the solar system in search of newer lands. Makes logical sense, because once you've saturated the solar system with life and whatnot, and the population sits at 100 billion or I don't know, half a trillion. It depends how you like do stuff. Then at some point it's just you'd have to go to other worlds, whether inner space or next star system or both. I don't know how that's going to happen. How both are going to happen is what I don't know. Well, I posit that at some point we're going to be able to precisely map the location and composition of most exoplanets in the nearby cluster well ahead of time. I don't know what that means. But yeah, it's true. We should be able to map exoplanets on some time spectrum in a 20-30 year time span. Then I say we'd have to figure out where to go and how to go about doing that. Even with the acquisition of sufficiently advanced technologies, voyages beyond the solar system will require a longer duration of time. So that's my thought 2.5 years ago. I do wonder what the prospects of powering wormhole would be. Is very science fictional, but But if one can be powered, that would be pretty phenomenal. So you'd power voyages through bending space time, and again, it requires an enormous amount of energy based on how we look at it. But if somebody can maybe reframe this model and with a core intent of actually bending space and time that doesn't require a lot of energy, then theoretically speaking, you could open up a wormhole to another part of the galaxy. And if you can do that, then you've created a Stargate. And this is definitely in the range of science fiction. However, Stephen Hawking did mention about the possibility that something like this could be powered, and he said that this creates loops. Sorry, not loops, but it could be a loop in time. But like so there's the different portals when it relates to quantum foam. I think these are Hawking's words. The source was Daily Mail, so it's a little sketchy, and I haven't read all of his books. But Hawking is credited with saying, again, through the Daily Mail, that you could open up different portals in space, at least, and time, and you could have these voyages. I don't really know how space-time works, and but if you can bend space-time, then two distances that are perceptually and seemingly distant from each other by a couple of light years could then be right next to each other, and you just open a portal between the two, and you can just step in and step out, and you are in an altogether different reality. Then I say it would be ideal that in 2015, 3 years ago, a portion of the human cognitive capital was focused on solving problems that are 500 to 600 years out. Because the complexities involved when it comes to solving some of these problems, I think it will take us more than a couple of generations to get there. I have a link to antimatter rockets. Actually, the Wikipedia pages for the difficulties with antimatter rockets, subsection for antimatter rocket. This is a very logical statement to make, the one that I just made. The development that's happened in a post-Renaissance sense, post-Enlightenment sense, Enlightenment sense, has been predicated on the scientific discovery. Now, this is what has driven all progress, and there's different counter arguments to that. From what I understand, I haven't looked into this too much, but this is how the whole scientific endeavor has been powered, and the way I understand it, the endeavor is predicated on statistical models. So what we do is, as humans and machines, we create statistical models, and we see the validity of certain outputs, and we then tweak these models, for lack of a better word. If this trend continues, which it very likely will, then we need to power these models in these different realms in order to be able to get certain outputs. So we need to, and it starts with a theoretical framework in order to be able to see and deduce and run experiments to be able to see is something there, and then you see what's working and you do more of that in order to be able to get better output, for lack of a better word. And I've mentioned a couple things. There's going to be many more developments. My understanding in all these areas is extremely limited, but what I'm trying to get to is that these statistical models will be pushed, and we'll continue pushing them till they start yielding outputs in certain percentages, and that's when they start becoming functional. And some of these developments may take longer. I think everything I say is up for dismantling. And antimatter drives, I don't know how long it's gonna take us to get there, if they're gonna be functional at all. But we still should entertain the possibility of looking into this technology. And a group of humans should be working on this today. We have 7 billion people on this planet. We're not looking at this with the right set of eyes or the mind. Jobs, resources, converting nature into wealth, resources, jobs is the means to be exporting resources, comes all from the convergence of nature. This cycle needs to be dismantled. We need to leverage, I think, newer cycles of procuring our energy needs and powering a lot of these resources, and we need to rethink how individuals get their meaning, not from their jobs, but towards something that really, really not just provides meaning, but does the work that is necessary in order to ensure the continuity of life now and in the future. And ideally, a portion of humanity should be thinking about further advances in propulsion systems, antimatter drive, advanced genetics, human life extension. Human life extension. I'm getting tired. As well, many other developments, some of which I've shared, and there is no reason why we cannot do that. A lot of these models need to be rethought of, intelligence models, and how skills development is all going to change in the future when you can augment your intelligence and other aspects of your biophysical traits, perhaps from birth, maybe after birth. Definitely cognitive abilities or psychological, a lot of these abilities you would be able to tweak them. I categorize, next I move on to stage 5. I'm definitely getting tired, so I might have to just rush through the next 2 stages. Stage 5 is what I categorize as the voyage, and this is the voyage to the nearest star system. Yeah. No, hopefully nobody's... I'm just going to mention that. Fingerprints are on the web now. And voyage to the nearest star system, my friends. And I say this is going to be a one-way journey. I also say that I don't think this is going to be a journey in flesh and blood, even with radical gains when it comes to life extension. Depends how things work out. But I say that there's going to be vessels that leave the solar system. They're going to be completely manned by AI, and they may even come in various sizes, all the way from micro machines to potentially mega size. Almost all life form will exist in the form of information or DNA. It is unknown whether these vessels would have the capacity or the capability of powering a galactic version of the internet on their way. Well, logical deduction, you're talking about information traveling at the speed of light. I don't know how quantum tunneling would mature, so that's the deductions I'm making. And hence, most probably, many ships are going to be sent in multiple directions. What I was really thinking about at this point when I made this video was genetic arcs. So you can think of these as seeds of life, human and other life represented in genetic form, with some kind of a payload or ability for very advanced constructs via which this information would merge with genetic information that may find at the destination, and then it would do the simulation and be able to boot up life. literally boot up life from information, DNA information, to create these life forms which would be based on human DNA. However, human DNA has evolved considering the panspermia theory. Anyway, so this would be the seeding of life. Again, is this ethical? I don't know. And the AIs would have to make these decisions if this project is to be conducted and continue. It probably will be at some point. I think it's inevitable. A lot of it's going to come as a result of further probing and understanding the structure of different habitats, specifically the exoplanets. So how I envision this is, but it depends on which time spectrum, but I think there's a very high degree of probability that at some point these machines, at least in this reality, these machines would exist which will be able to interact with its environment using it's hard to explain, but it's not like physical contact, it's not optical, and it's not plasma. It's kind of like a combination of the two out of three. And what this construct does is able to sequence life, run very detailed simulations in order to be able to mix and match life, how it sees willpower, the output, the ideal output, and not in just terms of biophysical, but also cognitive abilities. And a lot of these things will be augmented in the future. You have to appreciate that. So, once these constructs dock at a nearby star system, as in like an exoplanet or another surface, they will have a subconstruct, so they'll like dock there, and they will release these probes that are going to go on the surface or wherever they need to, and they will sequence whatever they find there, not related to life and other factors. They will determine the type, composition of the surface, the climate, and if any information has been found in terms of biology. And next they will sequence the simulations, like I mentioned. The intent would be to come up with, again, the ideal form or life form that would thrive in such conditions, now and projected. AI is going to make ethical decisions whether the introduction of the life form in its form would cause it will cause a negative disruption to the life form that already exists on that planet, and it will try to deduce constructs through which the two life forms could coexist. These constructs we send may also choose to create mini Dyson spheres around that planetary star system, that star system, not planetary, and just introduce life in these Dyson spheres so as not to disturb the microbial life or any other life that they may find on some of these other planets. And I add a note saying that the creation of the Dyson sphere and other artificial structures, how Ian Banks may have hypothesized in his fictional reality in most of his work, that we create newer constructs and do not colonize newer planets, is something I referred to earlier on towards the beginning of this clip. How I think this is actually going to happen is, I don't think I'm going to make this video public. It's probably, like a lot of ideas, are too out there, even though I think there's a very high likelihood that most of these ideas will materialize. But how I think this will happen is, if again we continue to choose to exist in these flesh and blood form, and transcension hypotheses doesn't hold weight, or both happen, I don't know how things are going to pan out,
or something else. Who knows? If this is how we're going to continue, then this particular sub idea that I was thinking of is focused more on. So you kind of imagine like there's a vessel. I don't know what size it's going to be at, and it's got primarily it contains very basic building block of life, and it contains a lot of information, and in terms of genetic information, in a variety of different formats. So, say it docks outside of a exoplanet. I don't know. Maybe the vessel is the size of like a football or something like that. It doesn't really have to be that big. Once it docks there, it sends the probe to the surface. It does all those scans, the detailed simulations, like I mentioned. These are all advanced genetic therapies or techniques. You have to appreciate that. Super advanced compared to what we have today. So you're able to render a lot of this information, run simulations, and then what it starts doing is starts using local material in situ, whatever building blocks it can find, in order to be able to introduce that genetic information in there. And it literally boots up life from scratch. It creates a 3D printer in situ. It prints the biological body. Then that's it. You know, whether it's doing it in an artificial embryo or however it's going to do that. Most probably in an artificial embryo, because you don't want it to evolve like from a primitive stage again. I'm talking about making humanoid kind of form, or human form, or humanoid form, something like that. And then after the period of gestation, there will be some construct for providing the nutrients, and the AIs would basically nurse these beings, these babies, and they would nurse them to a certain stage. They will 100% train them, educate them, care for them, and there will be other humanoids by this time, because local in situ material is going to be used to power such humanoid structures, which are going to be indistinguishable from humans. And they will basically raise these life form, and they will educate them, and they will educate them, this is how it happened at a certain age, past like, I don't know, 12 or between 12 and 15. And they will be educated that this is what happened, this is where you came from in terms of where your location, the original location is. Be as open and honest and ethical as you should be, and 100%. No, like, and the factor of what these beings will, these descendants of humans will feel is very important. You don't want them to feel alienated or longing to return to where they came from, because that may not be possible. So a lot of these ethical questions have to be factored in advance. And these children of men, actually I shouldn't use that term because it's a dystopian movie by that term. These transhuman, the form of like this subspecies will then evolve on these planets, and that's going to be their home planet, and they will thrive, and they will multiply, and they will do science, they will do arts and mathematics and other subjects they will pursue. They will grow, and they will prosper, and they will create colonies and their own civilizations in a span of a couple of 1,000 years or less or more, and they will have their own evolution. Basically, they will have their own cultures, they will have their own evolution, they will have their own systems of governance. A lot of it is going to be built on previous knowledge that has been extracted. So maybe all of the world's knowledge could, in effect, be condensed into DNA or some storage medium, and they will have access to all of that knowledge, and they will have the means and ability to be able to parse through that and make sense out of it. Maybe the intergalactic internet will be powered by that time, so we'll have the ability to be able to communicate with these beings Again, I don't know how it's going to happen because there's going to be a time delay considering the longer distances. So that's something that needs to be factored in. Moving on to stage 6, the foundation. Let's talk about Drake's equation. I talk about the prospect of coming in contact with another extraterrestrial intelligence that is intelligent of a nature. I just said extraterrestrial intelligence, then I said intelligent of a nature. It could be biological, or it could be like just artificial in a sense, like some post, like a robotic, almost like something that's not based on biology. Something could be non-DNA based. That's an interesting thought experiment to run. And implications of when we do come into in contact with an intelligent being from another part of the galaxy or the solar system. Who knows, right? But most probably galaxy. At that point I was categorizing this in terms of the quadrant, whereby I said they could be friendly and hostile. Say between. So this is the quadrant for. This is the axis for friendly, and this is the hostile. So hold on. There's could be different gradients. So they could be friendly or hostile. They could be passive or aggressive. They're when it relates to the technological advancement, they would sit on some spectrum. So they may be way inferior compared to our technical, like human origins, technical achievements at that time, or they could be primitive. And my uneducated guess, and I've made a video about Drake's equation, is that there's a very high degree of probability that there's life across the galaxy. And I think Fermi's paradox, we have all these hypotheses, but we haven't really deeply scanned anything. We haven't even been to all the nooks and crannies of Mars yet. So for us to ponder elaborately about the Fermi paradox, it's kind of weird in my opinion. So I'm getting tired. My speech is starting to slow down. It's 3:30 in the morning. I think there's a very high degree of probability that there are intelligent beings. This is the original drawing, by the way. I completely drew this. This person's skin is luminescent. It glows shades of blue and purple, and it's a friendly, rational, intelligent being with perceptive abilities, almost on the same scale as a human. The same amount, if not higher amounts of abilities to be able to absorb glucose. It is a biological being. It absorbs glucose in its blood structure, which gives it a slight advantage when it relates to the mental models it can conceive. And as opposed to 100 billion neurons in the human mind, it has 140 or 150 billion neurons, a lot more synaptic connections. But it's really the environment and how it has set up its culture and its systems and how they all interact together and how there's understanding and trust and the ethical use of advanced technologies, which allows this being, which I do not have a name for as of yet, to virtually create technological solutions that to a species like us at our technological state of development would literally look like magic. And I think there's a probability, I don't know high or low, that such a being or such beings do exist across the galaxy. And I've made a video about the Drake's equation if somebody's interested, which is really a synopsis or an extraction of the Drake's equation article from Wikipedia. It's just a brief extract of the first couple of sections. So as we expand through
out the galaxy, there is a high degree of actually there's some probability that we're going to come across other intelligent species. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think most, if not all, of these species will be kind and gentle, and they will be peaceful. And I say this because once you are at a certain level of technological advancement, abundance is inevitable. Technology makes everything abundant, and once you have abundance, it powers leisure, and leisure powers a lot of things. Leisure, I think there's something very interesting that leisure does with more time at your disposal. I could be wrong, but I think it leads to more poetry and more art and more expression and more discovery. You have more time to pursue your passion, and that is the pivotal, like, and this happens because you have more time. And logically speaking, intelligent species would want to enable constructs through which they have more leisure, so they get more of creativity and imagination, the time to imagine things and work on those constructs, and again pursue the things that bring balance in their societies and how they see fit. So I think the quotient for intelligent beings and how they would want to relate to each other is, I think, how could different societies, intelligent societies, work to contribute towards each other's well-being, starting with their own. And again, contingent on the reality that in a galactic sense, there's so much resources to go around. The logical extrapolation is that most, if not all, intelligence being would trend towards the things I have mentioned. And so the allegory that is made on the flip side of that spectrum or that debate, the allegory is made that like Stephen Hawking has made this statement that when Christopher Columbus came in contact with the native North or South American tribes, it didn't end very well for these tribes. And I think, unfortunately, such memes have also floated in popular culture. I think it was from the movie, I think it was Independence Day, but I can't remember. But there's this lady who's working for the military or the government, and she makes a comment again saying that when technologically superior civilizations come in contact with technologically inferior civilizations, it usually doesn't end well for the technologically inferior civilization. In reality, there isn't, outside of, like, this is based on our own experiences, and that is all that we think we know. Actually, all that it is all that we know based on the experiences that we've had on this planet. However, there's no reason why these models should apply in a galactic sense. And that's what I'm trying to get to, that I'm getting really tired. I don't think this video is going to be 3 hours long. But there's no, I think that there are intelligent beings out there in the wider galaxy. This is not this comment in particular, all the things I said, I think I'm trying to ground it as much as possible in the scientific method, using reason as a lens. I am using Drake's equation as a construct that I'm relying on.
if somebody thinks this is too out there, I can't help you, and you have to do your own research in order to be able to come to your logical conclusions. Drake's equation is a mathematical model, and it factors in actual numbers that we know of based on a lot of different analyses that we've conducted in order to be able to map the different parts of the galaxy. And then it takes a lot of those factors in order to be able to output certain numbers. And the probabilities seem high to somebody like me. Depends on how you look at the numbers. And that's why I say the probability of life and then intelligent life emerging in just this galaxy are pretty high. And this is where I come from when I say a lot of these things. And as resource abundance is almost is a guarantee, then so is a lot of the other things I'm saying. I think there are more friendly intelligences out there, a lot more. Going back to the blog post, I again talk about the Drake's equation, talk about stage 6. I make a note about biological form. My brain's slowing down, so I'm not able to make rational sense out of. I make a point about exploration of the galactic system. I then make a point that we will at some point start making attempts to explore and eventually live inside or near the event horizon. The reference I made is to Mr. Dukachev's research, who's a gentleman living in Russia right now. He is, I think he's worked at the Institute for Nuclear Research of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And I haven't gone through any one of his research papers in detail, but Mr. Dukachev's hypothesis is that there's a Kachi horizon in or around the black hole, and time dilates or slows down. So there's a source of energy there. With being so close to black holes, it's like advanced species would want to live in a place like that, because first, time is dilated, and secondly, there's a huge abundant resource of energy. It's a very interesting hypothesis. Very interesting hypothesis. Who knows what's out there, and definitely there's other hypotheses that I've come across recently. There's a paper on IEEE's website whereby it was hypothesized that advanced civilizations could be living on the periphery of the galactic system, and they would choose to do that because they're trying to solve some problem. And it's on IEEE's website if somebody wants it. Like Dokachev's, it's like his research is on the site where all the research papers are submitted, peer-reviewed ones at least. Anyway, so the other hypothesis is that, again, these beings they've gone into some kind of cryo or like some kind of suspended state when it comes to their cognition, which to us would appear suspended. And then they have these automated structures which are manning aspects of their civilization, including their defense. These are completely automated structures. The reason why they've gone into this suspended state is because their construct overall is trying to solve some very complex problems, which requires computation. I'm making a lot of assumptions there, but it is also making the assumption that these computations are destructive, meaning it would result in the loss of energy. And because of these assumptions that are made, the article then suggests that these beings are using what's beyond the galaxy, which is really cold space, really, really cold space. So once you get out of the galaxy, it becomes super cold. I think. I've never been there. But these beings are then using that as a heat sink, so their computation system are dumping the heat out there. It's interesting theory, but I don't know if there's any proof to back up that statement with. Like, or do we see any evidence that the temperature is fluctuating on the peripheries of portion of the galaxy? And if it is, then how can we do better measurement? And some of these techniques are quite advanced, so maybe with better developments we would be able to shed light on this phenomena. Pun intended. Stage 7 is what I call the tesseract. It deals with life in other dimensions. The math, it seems like it points that there may be possibly other dimensions. There could also be other multiverses, as in different universes. Then we could just be part of one giant universe. But there could be many other universes out there, and I don't know how they may or may not be connected. But I say development in stage 7 will largely be focused on the solving of the problems of what's on the other side and getting a better understanding when it comes to the fabric of space-time. Space-time could just be linked. Well, maybe space-time. Space-time could be linked in different dimensions or in different multiverses. Oh, I do mention that a universe could be linked with other universes. Multiverse. I make a point that some developments for stage 7 may start happening right after stage 5. Could happen before. I mentioned that bending space-time requires a lot of energy. Or not. And I point to the Alcubierre drive and the mass energy requirements based on the work that Miguel Alcubierre, the gentleman from Mexico who has come up with the theoretical model. Even an Alcubierre drive requires a fair bit of energy. I make references to the quantum foam. I mentioned that further developments will be made beyond the realm of advanced energy systems. And I say, although I'm not sure what those developments will be, and I say again, I think that this will be predicated upon what secrets unearthed. I make a point saying it's difficult to hypothesize the kind of form and type and consciousness or sentience that would actually be or how they would exist during stage 7. I say that my sense is during this stage there will be no dependency on any kind of a physical or biological construct. That life during this phase would, I suspect, largely be energy patterns. Yeah, I could see that you have a self-sustaining cognition model. I use the word consciousness there, but you could have a cognition model that's entirely made out of energy, or light, and it's just, I don't know how it's going to be contained, but I could see that happening. And if you have that, then you just if you can figure out a way to go from one reality to the next, then you can just beam the patterns. As the simplest answer, if you can figure out the way to transfer that information, then you will transfer the patterns just like you transfer data right now. But how you do the transfer is what matters. Like, how would you do that? Whether it's to another universe, to another slice of time, or to another dimension. And once you are in that dimension, what would you do? You would be like a being who has gone from the 2D world. Like, it's effectively like becoming all of a sudden from a microbe to a human, what would you do? That's a great question. That's a great question. I think if I should say that, that's a pretty good question. What would you? It's going to be kind of like going from that microbe to a human. And what would that human do all of a sudden if it's the human is new in a new environment? How would it learn by itself? What kind of stimulus would it receive? Talk about individual sentience and collective sentience. Talk about cells in your body powering you. Intelligence is up construct. Talk about Drake's equation. Talk about coming in contact with another intelligence. How that would change us. Talk about matter and how we are the minority in the minority. I'm making references to, I think it's only 3 or 4% matter and the rest is dark energy and dark matter. Ability to be able to engage with other worlds, focused on opening portals to other galactic systems, different trajectories in time. I just mentioned that. Then I say I'm not so sure about trajectory in time, but if you look at existence of any type of matter, then it is really matter burning in time that powers something that we call existence. Intelligent not. Michikaku says you can do loops in time. I don't know what the intended purpose would be, but there's an episode of Star Trek that briefly explored that as well. They open up some portal and all these ships come barging in from different loops in space or time, and they got to close that loop and send these guys back. There were different versions of them from different slices in time. I don't know. I'd want to do that. Like I think we should just try to like make sure this thing works for us. Whatever this collective slice of time we share. I don't think it's a good idea to tinker with or change anything in other slices of time. We should just mind our own business. I think I could be wrong. Like I don't know how all these things really work. If like I don't know like about time and the slices of time, so I'm not gonna comment on that too much. Possibly open a portal to another universe. Stephen Hawking's theory that he was working on was on multiverse. I just want to mention that. I say overall, with further advances in energy systems, the chances of opening portals to other galactic systems is higher compared to the rest. So overall, I cannot think of a serious roadblock that would be standing in the way of continued expansion through space. Closing notes, we have good technology. Technology can be used for purposes that are good or purposes that are bad and hurtful. I make the point that there's a lot of amazing technology that is sitting in the pipes and not being leveraged. If we can put the technology to use and let go of our Neanderthal tendencies or regressive tendencies, then there are places to go beyond belief that are waiting to be discovered. I say that these are the words from Neil Armstrong that come to my mind. Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief. My friends, Neil Armstrong is talking about things, tangible things. You can perceive, like you can reach out and like, this is not made by us to the best of our knowledge. These are the product of billions of years of evolution, and there's so much diversity, and the numbers are sheer number of places we're talking about discovering just in this galaxy, and there's 100 billion of these galaxies so far that we've mapped. There could be many more. There's trillions upon trillions of planets.
There are unimaginable sunsets. Maybe you will look at some planets, there are going to be two suns in the horizon, with maybe a couple of satellites, natural satellites, like moons in the horizon as well. And the landscape is going to be beautiful colors of crimson and magenta and purple and blue and yellow, and there is all this life out there that is going to take us a while to document and catalog in its different diversity of flora and fauna. There are friendships to be made, alliances to be gained by exercising our trust with these new intelligences that we are going to come across. There are technologies to be developed, and there are many beautiful experiences to be had. And all of this and more, and a lot more is possible. But we need to power more of discovery, and we need to power more of adventure. And that is, in the words of Jeff Bezos, I was going to say Steve Jobs, in the word of Jeff Bezos, to adventure and to fellowship. And that is what we need to cultivate, a sense of empowering our generation and the future generation to dream big and dream to keep the dream alive of making life spread through the farther reaches of the galaxy in as ethical of a format that we can. And that is the spirit of our species, is to go where we haven't gone before, where no one has gone before. I think that comes from Star Trek. So going back to the blog post, and in conclusion, I say I personally do not know what the purpose of existence is. That is, existence of matter. Hence, I would not know what the existence of the universe ought to be. I would add an edit to that. The edit to that would be that I like to have fun. I like to have good experiences, and I just try to make it that I keep it as simple as that. I want to have beautiful experiences. I want to have fun experiences. I want to be in the company of people who are beautiful and fun, not in just a material or on the surface sense. And I continue. It does appear, though, that the universe is quite fascinating in all of its diverse and different set of ways. What we know today and what we have uncovered is probably equivalent of a grain of sand compared to all the sand in the universe or in the world. So it's probably a lot more than that in the models, or like the comparison. And I continue. What I do realize is that even with the possibility that we could spend the next couple of million years and still not be able to map the different farther reaches of the universe, even with all that exploration, we still remain a minority in the minority. And hence, whether the universe is conscious or not, that is a question that I'm comfortable in contemplating for an extended amount of time. I said eternity, but eternity is a really long time, so I take that word back, or that phrase back, and I would say I'm rather comfortable in determining or not the pondering over the possibility, the question whether the universe is conscious or not. I am absolutely comfortable in living for an indefinite amount of time in order to be able to live the existence that I live. I have a very beautiful life. I don't need a lot of external validation or stimulus in order to be able to power my happiness. And I've worked very hard to be able to get to this level. And I'm very confident and positive that I can sustain it going forward. More friends that are beautiful and share some elements of how I think and my perceptions are welcome. Contrarian opinions are also welcome, as long as they're respectful from the perspective of personalities. Ideas are up for debate. Ideas can be dismantled, they can be rejected, they should be challenged. No idea is so there's no supreme idea in my mind that cannot be challenged. They should be challenged. Every idea should be challenged. Completely dismantle it and see where you want to take it. But let's be nice to each other and see how we can power some of these voyages and work on these realities. And let's go and check out some of these amazing places. And as we do that, let's have a party on the spaceship. I love it. Jamiroquai. Anyone who listens to Jamiroquai knows it's a lot about a lot of themes from cosmic themes and a lot of partying. The last paragraph is, now I did mention the 7 stages, but it is possible that some of us may directly leap into stage 7 and others wouldn't even notice it. And I say you get what you focus on. This is true. Like, you could just get into a reality whereby we have an abundance of time, and once you have that, you're living a pretty awesome life for an indefinite amount of time. It's like Shangri-La, or like this amazing reality, and you're living it for an extended amount of time. Pretty awesome. I think spoken too much is at, I don't know what mark, it's 3-hour mark. I'm tired. If you did watch it, you are such an amazing person. You watch me talking about my 7 stages of space exploration for 3 hours. I salute you, my friend, whoever you are, from this world or another world, whether you are even from this universe or not. I thank you for your time, and I will see you at another time. See ya. Bye.